Hey folks, I want to talk to you about this application Readio. I strongly recommend Readio to help grandparents and parents read to their grandchildren remotely when they can't be in the same room. Whether you're living across the country, across the world, or you're just gone on a business trip, Readio makes it easy for you to read to those young ones when you're away. It's a super easy tool that allows for video monitoring across the top of the screen so they can see you and you can see them, as well as having the book prominently displayed, making it easy for you to read to those young ones, or better yet, having them read to you. What I want you guys to do is go to cool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link for Readio, click on that link, and sign up today for your free trial. Jody Noland is somebody who is going to absolutely help us deepen our relationships, not just with our grandchildren, but with our wives and with our husbands and with our family and our close network. Now, she does this by helping us understand very simple principles when you're writing out words of affirmation and words that we want to make sure are documented and can be referenced back, right? These aren't just memories of you saying something to someone, but an actual document and an actual piece of paper that people can look back to. Sometimes it can be intimidating to sit down and start that process because we don't necessarily know how to do that. Letter writing is something that's becoming a bit of a lost art. But Jody is here to walk us through a very simple organizational process for writing these profound words of affirmation that will be meaningful and inspirational to those that receive them years down the road from after we've written these things out. So, hey, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Let's meet Jody and let's learn how to really create meaningful letters for those that are close to us. Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Jody. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I am super excited to have you on here today because what we're going to talk about is a fabulous tool that I think grandfathers should be using to connect with their grandchildren and build an even deeper relationship with them.
Thank you, Greg. I'm thrilled to be your guest, and I hope that grandfathers will leave inspired today after our conversation.
Oh, I know they will. And what's great about this, and we'll dive into it shortly, is a very simple framework for building a very powerful connection. And what we're talking about, folks, is this program that Jody has called Leave Nothing Unsaid. And Jody, if you don't mind, maybe give us a little bit of background about what inspired you to create this program and start talking to people about letter writing.
Sure, I'd love to. I was inspired by a father who was very intentional about wanting his children to know the things about them that he treasured. And it was a dear friend of my late husband and myself who was diagnosed with a brain tumor in his 40s. We had gone to see him at the hospital the night before his surgery. And just as, we made our way up to his bedside, his wife had come in the room, and he asked her with great intensity if she had brought pen and paper. And I wondered what he was so intense about. And I asked her the next day. He was in a 7-hour surgery. And so I went back to the hospital to be with her. And what she shared when I said, "What was Larry so intense about writing?" It so touched my heart. What she said was he wanted to write a letter to each of our 3 children in case he doesn't make it through the surgery today. And their children were all teenagers at the time. He lived about 9 months after that, but it so impacted me that I started telling everyone I knew about what he had done. And I thought it was such a beautiful gesture. And I thought I became a mom kind of later in life, and I was trying to be intentional about doing the right things with my daughter, things that would be nurturing to her. So I started sharing what Larry had done with his letters with practically everyone I knew. And I kept getting two answers when I would tell people about the simple idea. People either would say, I think it's a great idea, but I wouldn't know where to start. Or I think it's a great idea, but I'm not a writer. And I kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And I kept thinking, no, it doesn't have to be that hard. Maybe I can do something to help. 9/11 came and went, and my heart broke thinking about all the people that went to work that morning that probably had never put anything in writing to the people that they loved. And so my intensity to want to help people just continued to grow. So I finally put the Leave Nothing Unsaid workbook together and started sharing this message to people of all ages and stages. And I've seen such impact and power of simple, affirming, encouraging words. So it's really my passion in life.
Oh, this is great. And a question I've got for you, and this is all speculation, is that when I think the world, America specifically, but the world in general, I'm thinking back to the 19th century, the 1800s, where letter writing and diaries seemed to be so much more prevalent, even up until maybe the mid 20th century. Do you suppose that maybe with all the technology that we have, the easiness to pick up a phone and call somebody, to even travel as travel's gotten more accessible, has led to that decrease of a very intimate form of communication, which is letter writing?
I think so. Yeah, I definitely think so, Greg. It's easy to send a text message, but how often do people print out text messages so that they can be read and reread? To me, that's one of the great powers of just taking the time to be intentional and put something in writing so that a person can put it in their bedside table or, treasured spot. And when they're having a hard day, pull it out and say, wow, it doesn't feel like anybody believes in me, but my mom or my dad or my granddad believe in me. And I really, it's such a great reinforcement and such a lasting gift that I think we can give to the people that we love.
Oh, absolutely. And I think back too in my own life with some of the communication that I had with my grandfather. One of the things that was interesting is when he passed, my mom essentially gave me back the letters and postcards that I had sent to him, that he had held on to those things so much more than maybe some of the pictures we had taken.
Wow. That shows you how much your words meant to him, that he would keep them.
Yeah. It was something, like I said, I hadn't thought about because I was so much younger. It was just, hey, I'm sending a postcard from wherever I had a business trip, or just a letter that for me was just a letter. And I think maybe sometimes that's where we discount the power of our own words and writing, is that for the person writing, it may not be thought of as something super impactful, but the recipient, and I think that's what you're bringing out, is the recipient really benefits from that exercise.
Oh, definitely. Actually, I think the letter, maybe as a younger person, you might not realize it, but I think as I've done a lot of workshops leading people through this process, I have been amazed at how much joy it gives people when they're writing a letter to someone that they care about. Because what I found is that so many people have these feelings of love and affirmation locked up in their hearts, but they don't know how to get them out.
And it's interesting too, because like you talked about with the way that technology is in a text message, that's not the same intentional and intimate form of communication the way that a letter is.
Right. Well, we think about how many times do we get anything personal in our mail these days. Generally it's bills or junk mail, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Along those lines, there's a group that I belong to called Long Distant Grandparent. And one of the exercises that they talk about with grandparents is make sure you're sending postcards. Make sure you're sending, grandchildren that are 4 and 5 years old, send them some snail mail so that they've got something to get excited about. And I think
I love that. I listened to your podcast with the woman that started that group, and I loved the ideas that she was sharing.
Yeah, Carrie's absolutely great. Now, let's talk a little bit about the formula that you've come up with the letter writing. And now I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about that because I want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time on each of the 3 sections that we have in this process.
Okay, I'd love to. Well, I would say that the focus that I'm encouraging is to focus on affirming qualities in the person that you're writing to. So for a grandfather, to focus on the qualities, the character qualities, the passions, and the traits that you think really bring that person to life. My suggestion is, well, first of all, with writing a letter, I feel like just be yourself. Some people are just very net. And so if you don't use a lot of words, don't try to put a lot of words in a letter. But my suggestion is 3 simple parts. To start out and just say what it has meant, and I'm going to speak, say, to grandfathers, but what has it meant to you as a grandfather to have this child in your life? And try to express your heart of love for them. I think most of us kind of have a standard way that we say, I love you to the people that really matter. And so, whether it's, being your grandfather's been one of the greatest joys of my life, or I never knew I could love a child as much as I, love love you as my grandchild, or just something to express your heart of love of what it means to you, just a sentence or 2. And then my suggestion in the middle section is really, to me, the heart of the letter. And that is where you affirm the person that you're writing to. So in my workbook, I've got a couple of pages of adjectives and descriptive words that really seem to help people a lot. And what I normally say to people is look over those lists and come up with what you think are maybe the top 3 or 4 character qualities or strengths or passions. And then talk about, depending on the age of the grandchild, probably for most people it would be a younger grandchild, but I think you can really almost cast a vision for a child and tell them, for example, if you have a grandchild who's very tender and compassionate, you could say, I know that those qualities will make you a great parent one day because of your great compassion. Maybe you have a grandchild that's wonderful with animals. You could say, your sensitivity and your tenderness and your ability to relate to animals. I could see one day that you could use that to become a vet. But to really think about when you think about that child, what are the qualities that really stand out? I heard the expression once, when you're inside the jar, you can't read the label. And I think that's very true for children and teenagers, is that they often cannot see the qualities in themselves that we see that are so special. And so by affirming those, it's almost like you're bringing them to life. I've always had the image of a watering can when I've been, having my logo designed and that kind of thing, because I feel like our words can be so life-giving, and especially the huge impact that a grandfather can have on a grandchild. I mean, you're almost immediately in hero status just by starting out as a grandfather. But what a privilege to help that child realize the qualities in them that are so special. Most kids grow up and they hear what's wrong with them from their peers, or they feel like they don't measure up. In this world of social media, it's even worse. But to have something in writing from a grandfather that says, these are the qualities in you that are so special, and I can see how these character qualities will serve you well in life. So that's kind of, to me, the middle section of the letter, is to really focus on that. And then lastly, the last paragraph or last couple sentences that I encourage is almost, I put it under the category of always remember this. If this was the last conversation or the last correspondence that you were going to have with your grandchild, what would you want them to always remember? Maybe it would be always remember how much I love you. Always remember how much God loves you. Always remember, I'm always here for you. I believe in you. No matter what the world says, I believe in you. But just kind of, what would you want your closing comments to be? Sometimes people put advice in there. Sometimes they put scriptural blessings or encouragement. Sometimes it's, here's my prayer for you for the days ahead, or here are my hopes and dreams for you. But basically, that's kind of, it can be very simple, just like a one-page letter, but kind of start out with, here's how I feel about being your grandfather. And then middle section, here are the things about you that I think are so unique and special, and how I think they will serve you in the days and the years to come. And then lastly, kind of always remember this. Just 1, 2, 3, 3 simple paragraphs, but so powerful. I mean, if every grandfather would write every one of their grandchildren a letter like that, I mean, talk about what a treasure that would be. And I think having written encouraging and affirming words really can help people thrive and bring them to life.
Well, and I agree with that, because one of the things that I've been talking about with some other people outside was this, whether it was the podcast or what am I trying to do with this grandfather thing. And somebody reached out to me and said, look, the way that kids are facing so many struggles today, grandfathers are there to help them through that time. And so, yes, we have that relationship. And if we think about it, the relationship in isolation, but then too, grandfathers have an opportunity using letter writing as a way to, really talk to those grandkids and be a much more powerful, positive voice than all the little negative voices. Because to your point, when you were saying, you live within the jar and you can't see the label on the outside, I think it's an opportunity for grandfathers, because we're not parents, to be able to say, hey, here are the 3 or 4 affirming things about you, that you are absolutely spectacular and a rock star. And that letter, I can just imagine, is going to be something that is going to fight back a wave of negativity that kids just naturally go through. I mean, being in eighth grade stinks. I remember being in 8th grade. It's horrible. You got all sorts of hormone stuff going on. You've got all sorts of, you're anticipating high school. You've got all sorts of things going on. You're clumsy. You make mistakes, and it takes 3 months before you live it down, right?
Absolutely.
And so these letters become very powerful. Now, one thing that I'd like you to talk about is, when is a good time for a grandfather to sit down and write one of these? Especially, let's say, I'm not used to this. Maybe I'm not used to expressing deep feelings. I'm used to saying, hey, I love you, kid. You're wonderful. Keeping it at that level. But for somebody that's not used to sitting down and being retrospective and going through this exercise, are there moments in life or a year where maybe making these letters becomes a little bit easier, especially, let's say, the first one that you might write?
Well, I think, honestly, I think a grandfather could write a grandchild a letter on the day they were born. I mean, you wouldn't be able to say character qualities, but you could certainly talk about your love for them and your hopes and dreams for their life in general. But I guess maybe I've lived long enough to realize how fragile life is. But I just feel as though I always encourage people, don't put it off. I mean, it might not you might not feel like the most eloquent person in the world, but I would say do it now. You could do it for often tying it with an event, like do it for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or for a birthday. I hate for people to wait because I've had too many sad situations where, something horrible happens that's not expected. And, a child might be left without ever having that letter. And so I call myself a perfectionist in recovery. And as a perfectionist in recovery, I've had to realize that sometimes perfectionism can keep me from doing the important things. And getting like too hung up on myself. So I would say I would not wait, and if you're writing to a younger child, obviously it would be a shorter kind of letter. It was interesting. A few years ago, I had a milestone birthday. We won't talk about which one, but my daughter wrote me a letter. She put a book of letters together for me from friends and family and loved ones. And then she wrote a letter, and she wrote the number that was my birthday year. She had that number of things that she loved about me. But one of the things, like when she was starting in, elementary school, kindergarten, I always used to take an index card and just write a little note on an index card every day and put it in with her lunch. And I'd usually put a sticker on there or whatever. But I was reading back through her letter the other day, and she had mentioned those lunchbox notes. And she said, I felt like the most loved kid in elementary school. And, it was interesting. I mean, she's in her late 20s now. And I was just thinking, wow, so I guess the same idea, like whether it's a postcard to a grandchild or just a simple little note, maybe it's just one thing that you say, to a young child, like, I love your sense of humor. I love your resiliency, or, that's probably a big word for a little child, but, just to even just zero in on one thing, or you could say, I'm going to write my grandkids a postcard every week, and every week I'll write something different about them that I love. It doesn't necessarily have to all be in one long letter, but to put it in writing in this day and time is so powerful because it's something that can be read and reread and really cherished as the years go by.
Oh, absolutely. Now, what are your thoughts on handwriting the letter versus typing it out on a computer?
I feel like the most important thing is to get it done. I've had a lot of discussions with people. I mean, I think many of us have been doing so much typing on computers that comes a lot easier. Sometimes people say my handwriting's not legible, but I always say, please at least sign your letter by hand, because there's something about seeing someone's handwriting that just brings back a whole nother dimension of emotions. My dad, in his later years, developed macular degeneration, and his handwriting wasn't very legible to begin with, and it really wasn't legible once he developed macular degeneration. But he would still write my daughter notes, and sometimes they're they're written on an angle. Like, I don't think he knew kind of on the paper that it wasn't going straight, but oh my gosh, she loves those still, So, but I would say at least put your signature on there, and maybe an I love you or something by hand. I think ideally the whole thing by hand, but I'd say it's a lot more important to put it in writing and communicate it than it is to get hung up on, oh, I don't have time to write it by hand or whatever. Sometimes people use that as an excuse, I think.
Well, sure. And I think too that in this day and age, you can take a little bit of advantage of with older grandkids is maybe even having that as an email. If you print it out and then sign it and then keep it or send it to them, so that it doesn't get lost in electronic ether.
Mm-hmm. You're saying do it by as opposed to doing an email?
Well, I think if I can envision a scenario where a grandson or granddaughter's off at college, and
Right.
maybe you're inspired to sit down and write kind of a touching email to them that may not exactly follow this. But I'm suggesting that maybe when grandfathers send those things off, go ahead and print it off as well, and then sign it and then stick it away somewhere. Because I think one of the things that I liked in your workbook was you had talked about attaching some of the letters to your will kit, and having that record. So as things transpire and people are going through effects, you've also got a copy of some of those letters where, if things get lost during moves or whatever.
Yes, definitely. I've even, there are a number of people that I've met that actually have a letter framed, from a father or a grandfather, that they keep it in their office. I can't remember the actor's name, but it cracked me up because it was Jerry Springer was interviewing this guy, and I can't think of the actor's name at the moment. But the actor was showing this letter that he had from his dad, and it was a very short little letter, but it was very affirming. And Jerry Springer was going, I'd give anything to have something like that. So,
but it's true, because we talk about those things, is that sometimes parents, and I'm going to say dads sometimes, and granddads, were not the best communicators. And
right.
There's a lot of things that we, as guys, we kind of just, it's there. We love this person. They know we love this person. I don't really need to say that. But then when you have that short letter from somebody, especially when it hits during a tough time, and it's like, hey kid, I really believe in you. You can do this. That speaks as much volumes as any kind of Winston Churchill volume on World War II, a small little paragraph.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. One thing I always like to encourage people is that if you write your child or grandchild a letter and they don't say anything, don't think that it doesn't mean a lot to them. I was doing a workshop where my daughter went to high school, and she happened to be home from college at the time I was doing it. And she asked if she could come along and just sit in the back of the room. But I had strict instructions not to call her out and not to ask her anything. So I was being compliant. And I think she was just making sure I wasn't embarrassing her at her alma mater. But at the end of the workshop, I asked if anyone had any comments or questions, and she raised her hand. Had no idea what she was going to say. But her comment was this. She said, I just want to tell all you parents that if you write your child a letter like this and they don't respond, don't think that it doesn't mean a lot to them. She said, I've grown up with my mom writing me letters, and I always feel awkward reading them in front of her. But I always go in my room and close the door and read them over and over again. And that would prove equally true, I know, for a letter from a grandfather to a grandchild, is that they might not know how to respond to you. Like, they may not know quite how to say thank you, but don't think it won't be read and reread and reread.
I think sometimes too, there can be communication challenges going both ways. We've talked about fathers and grandfathers, but kids, sometimes you get to different awkward ages and you don't have the vocabulary, and then you're not quite sure what to say, and maybe you're not a real hugging family. So when you feel like you want to hug somebody, you're not quite sure what to do. So that's great advice about the, you don't always get the feedback, but the message is taken to heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really feel like it's almost like watering seeds. And, it may take a while to see them sprout, but for a child to know and to be reminded and to be able to read and reread that they're a treasure to their grandfather, that is a huge, huge gift.
Well, that, and I think too, is with grandfathers writing these letters, I'd almost talk about how much they mean to the family as well as individually to the grandfather, right? Because we talk about the the family histories and the family unit. And, even with stepkids and adopted kids and things like that, this is a real good way to be very inclusive in that, hey, you're one of us, you're part of our family, and that family is before, with your great grandfather who may have passed, and it's going to be with your kids that aren't even, around yet, but you're part of this group. So
that legacy, that's a beautiful reminder, that kind of reminder of the legacy.
Now, one of the things I liked about the workbook was you had a section in here about more ways of encouraging the heart. So you had examples of some other activities that can be done at different times with your examples. Can you walk us through a few of those?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I might open up to my pages in the workbook to remind myself. I think so much of life, and I think cultivating relationships, is just being intentional. But some ideas, let's see, I'm trying to think this is one I love at family vacations. Like, for example, if a whole family were to go to the beach together or something, and depending on the number of people in the family, at dinner each night, you could pick one person in the family who is going to be kind of honored, or the special one. And you could either have people write things down on cards, index cards or something, which I like so people can reread it. But each person could write down something that they love about the person that's being honored. You could have their favorite dessert that night, or their favorite game, or their favorite movie, but just to honor them. I had another friend who they called them heart happies. And whenever a birthday would be celebrated, they would go around the table and everyone would talk about the birthday person, boy, girl, or even adult, and what it was about them that made each person's heart happy. So that's another way. I've seen people take, even just like a mason jar, and take popsicle sticks and say, for a birthday, or, it might be, say, a 21st birthday or something, you could write 21 things I love about you, or 21 things that are special about you, and just kind of stick those in a jar that could be pulled out. I've done and seen many people do word clouds, where they take individual words that describe the person. And oftentimes that might be a collective project. I've seen people do it, I did that for my daughter's 21st birthday. I wrote to a lot of people that loved her, and I said, send me one word that describes her. And I took all those words and I put it together in a word cloud, kind of put her name in the center of it, and then kind of, just put the words all around and put it in a frame. I've seen people do that for rehearsal dinners, for example, where they take the bride and the groom and they ask the bridesmaids to give one word about the bride, and the groomsmen to give one word about the groom, do them in two different colors, and put the bride and groom's name in the center and their wedding date and the words around that in the word cloud. That's another idea. The idea just of lunchbox notes, or one friend did this for a teenage boy. Like every Friday morning, he'd stick a note under his windshield, and his son was an athlete, so he's typically playing in some sort of a game on a Friday night, but he'd always put something under the windshield that his son could take with him. So those are just a few ideas, but I think it's really just about saying, these are the things about you that I really love and cherish. One of the things I try to encourage people is to think about, under the umbrella of encouragement, that yes, appreciation is very important, but appreciation is often talking about what the person has done for us. I'm really trying to encourage and create a culture of affirmation also, and it does feel a little awkward to say, these are the things about you that I find delightful, or that are so wonderful or so spectacular. But affirming someone, you just watch when you affirm someone, even if it's the barista or someone that you interact with regularly, if you say something affirming to someone about who they are as a person, it makes them stand up straighter. Guarantee you get a big smile on someone's face. So I'm just trying to get people to start thinking, how can I affirm the people that really matter to me, and do it on a regular basis?
Oh, that's a great point, because I do like how you explained that a lot of times we appreciate what somebody's done, and a lot of times it's what they've done for us or our group, right? They came in and spoke to our group. They came in, volunteered time. They gave us our pickup truck to let us move, whatever that might be. But that's not really who the person is. In that instance, it would be, you are a very generous person with, your gifts and abilities. You are, yeah. And I think that goes back to that label example that you gave, that I absolutely love. That is that, sometimes we forget who we are because we don't see or get feedback on that label that is us.
Right. And I think for most of us, we tend to be really well versed in what's wrong with us and not so much in what's right about us. And so that's why I think affirming can be so positive and so powerful, is that you're reminding someone of, this is what's right about you. This is like, no matter, maybe you don't make the team, or you don't get into the college you want, or, whatever it is that, for example, a grandchild might be going through. That doesn't say that as who you are, like the substance of who you are, you have so much going for you. And I think that's the thing that really nurtures people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, too, this is just another example of calling out for grandfathers to be intentional with that relationship, and not take the relationship with the grandchildren for granted, that it's always there. The grandkids showed up. I didn't really have much to do with it. I love them. I take them out for ice creams, or, whatever that is. But it's really saying, hey, grandfathers, let's take this relationship to another level. Let's write some of these letters. Let's do some of these exercises and really deepen that relationship so that they know without a shadow of a doubt how much they are loved by their grandfathers and the family.
Yeah, it's such a privilege to be a grandfather. And, it's when you think about the potential impact that you can have on these little lives and continue to have, it really is a privilege. And it's, you're right. I think it's easy to say, kind of the joke about, I told you I loved you when we got married, and if it changed, I'd let you know.
Right.
I think it's easy to kind of think the same thing with, oh, my grandchildren know that I love them. But the potential impact that a person can make by sincerely affirming someone in their life, a child, as they grow and develop, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. Now, Jody, we've had you on for a little while. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would like to cover with regards to the program, or letter writing, or relationships?
Well, I guess my hope is that I would love everyone to not just write one letter, but to be intentional about writing letters to all the people that matter to them. I do, and if anybody wants help or they want one-on-one coaching, I can do that via Zoom. I do Zoom workshops and I do in-person workshops. It's really not that hard. And my hope is that I tried to create a approach that people could replicate and say, wow, I can do this. But I've been doing this now for probably very focused for the last decade, and have heard so many stories from people about the impact of letters that they've received and letters that they've written. I guess my plea would just be to not put off taking the time to do this. It's so easy to let the tyranny of the urgent get in the way. and you don't know what storms are going to hit. You don't know what's going to happen in your own life. So I would just encourage people to make doing this a priority, and don't say someday I'll get to it. Have somebody that you're accountable to and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it by X date. That would be my hope and my prayer.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I hope that grandfathers and grandmothers and parents that are listening to this also take to heart that, if you haven't done this exercise before, do it that first time. And then, to your point, it's not necessarily hard, but then start to set goals of doing this at least once a year, if not more, because, man, wouldn't it be great if your granddaughter, who might be 10 years old now, gets married at 25, has 15 of these letters from her grandfather, over the span of adolescence and young womanhood. What a great gift that would be for her launching into that next chapter of her life, right?
And what an anchor, just what an anchor for as you navigate the storms of life.
Absolutely. Now, Jody, where can people best contact you, follow what you're doing?
Well, I have a website, which is leavenothingunsaid.com. And so that's where you can follow me. You can subscribe to my blog. You can order a workbook there. You can contact me to schedule one-on-one coaching or to speak to a group. So that's probably the best place.
Okay. And we'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And folks, I've got this workbook. It's absolutely fantastic. It's got the whole program that we outlined, and it's got a lot more in it as well. It's got a ton of examples. It has a whole list of words that you can go through with this affirmation exercise, so that you don't have to sit there with your own thesaurus. So, do yourselves a favor, get over to leavenothingunsaid.com, order yourself the workbook. You will be happy that you did, and it'll be a real tool for you to start really building these meaningful connections with your grandchildren. So, Jody.
And please email me if you write letters. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear the impact on it. So.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Jody, I just wanted to say thank you again so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I know this information is going to be impactful for not only grandfathers, but also their grandchildren. And this has really been a great exercise for us to learn more about.
Well, I've been honored to share this with you, and I'm just excited thinking about all the letters that are going to happen. So thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity.
What a cool conversation. It's great to have somebody that talks to us about how letter writing and receiving letters is still a very important part of people's lives today. I think we're all used to sending out messages at 140 characters or less, or a quick email or a text message or something like that, but we don't often sit down and pull out some pen and paper and write that important letter that somebody's going to receive. I thought it was really interesting that, the process itself isn't that complicated. It's pretty easy. The way that Jody breaks it down is we just express our feelings for that individual. We highlight what's unique and special about that person. And then we describe our hopes and dreams and prayers for the recipient. It becomes something that children and adults can look back over the years and see how much from, let's say, just a grandparent's perspective to them that they've meant for us, and how much we want them to win in life, and how much we're there to support them and cheer them on. And I think it becomes very, very important to have those messages out there as our grandkids hit those teenage years and early adult years, where the world becomes bigger and more complicated and they feel maybe a little bit lost in it. To have these words where they can dig them out of a shoebox, reread a message from Grandpa or reread a message from Grandma, and know how much that somebody out there really cares and loves them and wants them to win. Now, the links for Jody are in the show notes, so go to the website, check out the show notes for this episode, and then be sure to connect with her through her website. Get that workbook that we talked about, and then connect with her on Facebook. So until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.